Hi there, this is going to be a webinar tutorial on how to get up and running from Revit to do some cloud rendering and then also benefit from some of the cloud rendering services to create other types of views. I'm going to try and avoid PowerPoint and get straight into actually showing you how to use the tools with this basic bathroom demo scene I have here. So with your Revit application, you need to navigate to your View tab, and what you'll notice, I'm using 2017 here. If I want to render directly in the application, I don't have the option to flick between Art Render and Mental Ray in this new version. I just have the Art Render, the ART render, which is the new Autodesk ray tracing rendering engine. So what I've got here is some of my basic settings. If I just do a interior sun only rendering here with no clouds, and I won't adjust exposure, you'll start to see instantly a little bit of a change in how the rendering engine actually calculates. And what you will see across this rendering engine and numerous other rendering engines coming into our products, you're going to get this real-time feedback on the lighting. It's not going to do the buckets anymore. It's not going to process different types of passes. You're going to get real-time feedback on how that's going to look. Now what you'll notice is my exposure isn't quite right. It's a little bit overexposed. I can go through some of the exposure settings and instantly see that exposure adjust in the product. So it's quite a nice rendering engine, which allows us to get some real-time feedback in a few seconds as opposed to waiting for the buckets to pass over and then waiting for the final result. The other thing to note here is if you're new to rendering, if you want to see the internal lighting, you want to turn on interior sun and artificial, and this will be the same when you go to render in the cloud. So again, I'm just going to re-render that, and it's going to run at level 1. It's got sun and artificial, and you'll start to see a few rays bouncing around here, and on the left hand side my artificial IES data from my lights are starting to show up, and this will be calking. Again, a little bit overexposed. I'll just stop it, and I can then maybe just adjust the exposure 10.5, and we'll just apply that, and we're getting a few better results here. And I'm just doing this before I go to the cloud. I just want to do some test adjustments just to get an idea of how that illuminance is going to run. So we're getting something that's not too bad, and you can actually go and run these in the cloud as well. It just all comes down to personal preferences on how you want this image to look. So I'll just leave it at that for now. We'll adjust that later, and we'll move on to cloud rendering. I just wanted to highlight this as the new rendering engine that Autodesk has in its product. You can do this very quickly to get some real-time feedback on that graphic before we go to the cloud. So I'm signed in here, so make sure you're signed in. If you're not signed in, it will ask you to sign in before you go to render in the cloud. The first thing you're going to see here by default is the cloud credits will be set to 0, and you're going to see, typically for most users, you'll have 100 cloud credits. I have 603,000 because I'm part of Autodesk. You can also click on email me when the render has completed. We have an estimated wait time here of 10 minutes. And as we go through and perhaps adjust some of the settings here, so if I crank it up to final and I adjust the image size, it's starting to absorb a few more cloud credits. If I go and crank this up to extra large and I want to do a stereo panorama, you can see it's going to absorb more cloud credits as I increase it. So what I want to do here though is just show you how to get started very quickly with a still image, keep everything on the default settings, and then when you're ready to commit to a render, then we can redo this on the cloud. I prefer to work with the JPG file format, but you can also run with PNG and TIFF. So here's my render. If you are using PNG, you can turn on the alpha transparency if you want to bring in a background in Photoshop or Autodesk Pixel afterwards. And another thing to note here is that you can render all the views simultaneously in your model should you want to. So I'll leave that on. Again, it's not going to affect my cloud credits by rendering all those views. And this could be fine for rendering out a basic view to print out an A4 to place out on the table for a design meeting. Now it's uploading the scene data, and you'll notice in this scene I've got a few customized materials. It takes this information up very quickly, and you can move away from the screen. You can go continue in the background, and you'll see this little spinning dialog here. This will tell you that it's uploading. So you can keep on working in your 3D environment here, moving your design features around, and it's not going to affect your rendering. It's just taking a snapshot of that model, it's processing it, and it's going to the cloud. Now if you want to see it running on the cloud, once this is finished uploading, it will tell you it's in render progress, or you can go here to your render gallery, and this will take you straight into your account to show the renderings running live on the cloud here. Now, while this is just loading up, I did promise not to go into PowerPoint, but I just want to show a couple of things in a PowerPoint for some of the lighting settings, which is kind of important if you're wanting to get a bit more detail. Every light fitting that goes in your model, if it's come from a manufacturer, you need to ensure it has an IES light source in it. It may come in with some default light sources, so you can actually swap these out with proper IES data. So for this apartment model I have here, I can go and display the light sources in the visibility graphics, and I can swap out the standard light fitting, which you're seeing on some of the lights here, for a proper IES file. When you do that, you're going to get much better results and much more realistic results. If you want to know more about IES data and how they display, you can go to the manufacturer's website, like Thorn and Equizini provide these files, download them to your Revit IES database here, and you can get this tool here which is called the IES Viewer. I'm using version 2.99, and I can navigate to the folder, click on the IES files, and then get some feedback on how this IES web is going to cast light in my design. So it's a handy tool to show you how the light is going to display before you run it in your model or test it in your model. This is the light family that I'm using, and this one came with a default spotlight. If you click the button next to that, you can bring in the IES manufacturer's data and load that into your library, and you'll move from this to the other display one, which is the IES web file. So back to the cloud here, and what you'll see is here's some of the renderings that I've just been running on the cloud. So this is one that did the small render. It took less than a minute. These are all the views that I have in the model. That one was done a while beforehand. That's a panorama render. We'll come back to that. And I'll just bring up the one I had on the screen. You can see it's taken 32 seconds to render it. It's 100 kilobits, and that's the quality you're going to get. Now if you want to download it, just click on the arrow, download the image, and if we just open that and bring it up full screen, it's okay. It gives you an idea of the light, how much luminance is coming in here, and you can say, right, it's too dark, it's too light, I want to change the view. I haven't committed to absorbing any cloud credits just yet. I can revise it. If you want to re-render it on the cloud, you don't need to re-upload the model. So I can re-render using new settings, and a couple of things you're going to note here that you're not going to see inside of the application is you can choose environments. One of my preferred environments is the field environment. It's like an HDRI background. If you click on it, any of those eyes that you click on in the application will take you to the Autodesk Docs help site, and this will tell you what each environment is. So we have a dock, a riverbank, crossroads. My preference is always to use the field, but perhaps here we could use the dock environment. So I'll choose the dock, which isn't showing here. Just double check. Must be the boardwalk. And we're going to crank up the settings here to final. Leave the exposure on advanced. And you can crank this up really high for your rendering settings. I don't typically go over large. Large is usually pretty good. You've got 15 pixels by 1059. You can actually customize the aspect. So if you want to make it the size of an A4 sheet, it's 2710, I think it is, by 2100. You can do that. You can lock it in, and you'll see the cloud credits calcing here, and it doesn't like that. So we'll just go back to not the custom aspect ratio. Let's keep that on large. Okay, so there's a few things you can do, but it's going to give you a few warnings. Now with that, I'm going to start rendering. And while that's rendering, I can keep on rendering other types of views here. So this one here, the close-up of the bathtub, there's a few other render options here. And we can re-render this as other type of renderings. So this one, I'm going to choose the illuminance tool. And this allows me to look at the illuminance in the model at a certain date and time of the year. I'm just going to leave it on what's here at the moment. In fact, I'll use the date from the view. And you can flick to Lux for your illuminance settings. And I'm just going to use the automatic and logarithmic. And typically the sky model with the Perez or where the sky is the default one to use. You can change these if you need to, and just leave it on the default settings. And we will run that. And while that one's running, I'll show you a couple other ones. This is a close-up of the basin, and maybe I want to show a sun path animation with this one. We can flick to render as a solar study, and the solar study will allow us to do a start and end date. We can set it up for 15-minute intervals, and we can run it from 8 a.m. in the morning to 8 p.m. at night. You can see the cloud credit's quite low here. That's because the image is really small, but if you have a larger image, this will consume more cloud credits. It's going to give us 49 frames of animated GIF footage. If we choose to be 1 hour, it's going to drop down to 13. So we'll do it 15 minutes, and we'll let that one run. And then finally, I won't do this one here. I'm going to show you the one I've done before, but you can do panoramas and stereo panoramas and turntables. Turntables more for a spin around on the outside of the building. The stereo panorama and panoramas allows you to render a 360 view for looking at on a web browser, and the stereo panorama will allow you to render a view that can go into a VR headset device. So if you need to know more about this, there is things like Google Cardboard VR or Samsung VR, and you can get all these different types of devices here that allow you to view the image from your phone inside a headset like Google Cardboard. So $14, pretty easy, simple to use. If you want to go a little bit more sophisticated than this, we have there's a VR Google box here, and again you can put your phones in these devices. You can load the images onto your phones. You can use a barcode scanner or open them from your email, and then you can be standing in there and looking around that space in 3D. So with this one I've done here, I'm just going to bring it up. This is one that was geared up to work in both stereo panorama and on the screen. So I'm going to copy to clipboard. So for anybody watching this video at the moment, you can get out your barcode scanner on your phone, and you may want to pause the video just now, pause it, scan that image into your phone, and this image that you see on the screen will load in there. And then if you've got some Google Cardboard, put your phone in the Google Cardboard and you'll be able to spin around this bathroom design. Now if I bring it up full screen, you can navigate around. You can see this is just a demo model, hence why there's nothing in the background here. But it's giving us a pretty good result with some of these fittings from Panorama. This one I had the lights turned off, but we can see the sun casting into the space. We can look down at the rough floor here, spin around the design as though we're inside it. A couple other tools here. You can zoom in on objects should you want to, zoom out. And then this just tells you how to get more immersed with Google Cardboard. So it explains VR Panorama, how to do the stereo panorama, some basic steps, and some sample images we have here from numerous users. So with that, you can copy to clipboard, paste it into a browser, any type of browser, and this will load it up from the cloud. So even if you don't have a VR unit and you want to put it onto your phone, you can still open that email, spin around. Okay, so a few Panorama viewers here. These are some other ones that some other users have created with their customized textures and their IES data. And we can see the level of detail that you can produce on the cloud for an interior render, which would take a while to actually run this with all this information, whereas on the cloud you can do this very quickly without too much pain. So back to the interface here, and there's a couple of renders that are finished. So this is the illuminance study, and for this small image we can start to see how much illuminance is coming in to the naturally lit space here. So the yellow being the brightest points, and then down in the far right hand corner the illuminance value is quite low, and that's showing as blue. We also have our quick sun study here. So these are the 49 frames. It was only taking up 2 cloud credits, but if I go and run this, you'll start to see the sun path in the background and the date and timestamp here moving across in 15-minute intervals, and you're starting to see how much light is coming in through that light well and then entering into that bathroom space. So you've got almost 50 seconds of animation for your light study for 2 cloud credits. And of course, if you want this a lot more sharper, you can re-render the still image as a larger image, then run the sun path study, and you'll get an idea of what it's like from morning to sunset. And what you're noticing here, if I just go back a little bit, at night time the lights will come on. So if I go and play that, as the sun disappears, the light and the light well will come on here, and we've got our nighttime illumination. The other render I had here was the render with the environment background. Now what this is going to do is it's going to illuminate it with a high dynamic range image as opposed to a direct sunlight image. So it's going to give you this more ambient sort of looking render. So at the moment this may not look as sharp as you want it to look. You don't have to download it and adjust it. You can actually do this directly in the application. So if I go adjust exposure, it's going to give me the same sort of exposure tool inside of the cloud as we had inside of Revit. So it's a little bit dark. If I just take it down to 9, now I'm going to beef in a little bit more sun. For highlights, I typically like to start with 0.65, and that's going to wash it out quite a bit. So you can adjust the exposure. Again, it comes down to personal preference. So maybe 0.35 might be better for the highlights. And that's kind of getting there. You don't want to wash out the background too much, but you still want a bit of contrast between the dark and the light. Midtones is where you want to maybe bring up just the internal light here. You can see by just cranking it up in small increments, it's just going to give you a little bit more illuminance. 0.35 is probably the setting I want. And shadows, you can dial that down a little bit. Saturation depends whether you want it to make it feel a lot more warmer with the colors or cooler. So this one, maybe I want the lights to look a bit more warmer and bring out a bit of the render wall here. And then white point, if I just crank this up, white point is making it feel warmer or cooler. So it's kind of like your Kelvin range, so 4200 will give you more of a cooler sort of look and feel. Typically 6500 is the standard, but 62 is probably not too bad for this particular render. So it's a subtle adjustment here. It all comes down to personal preference, and you can get some pretty good results with just a couple of tweaks. Maybe 9.5. Nope, 10. Okay, so with that, I can go apply, and that's just going to bake another copy of that image. And probably the last couple just to show you. This is where you can choose what you want to display. So if I just have a lot of renders here, but I only want to show and highlight the panoramas, I can do that. Or likewise, if I just want to show the suns or the illuminance renders, we can do it. Here's one I've done previously. Again, it gives you the artificial lighting as well, showing at about 2200 kelvins. And let's go back to showing my main one. So here we have both the first image, sorry, that's the customized one there, and that was the one before. So there's the customized one which I brought up. You can see the adjustment in the exposure versus the original render. And that's a little bit dark, a little bit flatter. All comes down to personal preference. So with that, I will just note that there are other items where you can render other applications where you can render stereo panoramas. So this is one that I've done from Navisworks. And in Navisworks you can render to the cloud, and 3ds Max you can render to the cloud, in AutoCAD. All of these tools have access to the same cloud rendering services. If you want to know more about VR, we have a website. This is called the Autodesk Render Them Speechless. So if you just click on the tips and trick typepad blog here on Render Them Speechless, this will do a deeper dive on every aspect of cloud rendering, what the best settings are before you publish it from Revit or your chosen applications. There's also webinars that you can watch that are recorded, and it will help you get the most out of your cloud subscription. Again, it's talking about the lights, what I was showing in that previous model. And there is one here called How to View Stereo Panoramas on VR Devices. And if you want to go a little bit further, there's the Gear VR setup, more advanced ways of gearing it inside of your Windows application. And we have on the Autodesk Knowledge Network an article and a recording, a 3-minute recording on how to actually set this up. So Google Cardboard is the cheapest way to get into this technology. And if you do want to go a little bit further, I've got a bit of a deeper dive here on the Autodesk rendering website. This is a step-by-step tutorial on how to customize materials and render that scene that I've just shown. And for anybody wanting to attend Autodesk University, we had this in Sydney in a couple of weeks' time in August the 18th and 19th. We're going to have technical booths will be showing these workflows, and we're going to have a VR device set up for doing high-end VR with a city of San Francisco, where you can walk through models, and we've got interactive devices to point and shoot, move lights around, and move from point A to point B. So this is definitely worth attending. It's going to have a lot of advanced, really cool workflows here for you to learn from, and also connect with numerous Autodesk staff and like-minded peers. So with that, thank you very much for watching this recording, and please do get in touch. We can reply to your comments on the YouTube channel and give you some feedback, and do more recordings as requested. Thank you.